Well, folks, it looks like the Big 12 may not be done expanding after all. And this time, it looks like Brett Yormark is once again turning his attention to bringing in basketball-only schools. What do I think about this? I'm going to tell you right after this word from our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing, only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you. What is up, college hoops fans and fellow members of Mountaineer Nation and Big 12 fans out there? Welcome in to this episode of Hoops from the Hills. My partner, Mountaineer Paul, was not able to be with me today. He's taking care of some personal things, getting moved back into his home. I think he's told you guys the story. I'll let him tell it to you. I don't want to steal his thunder, but get in the comment section, tell Mountaineer Paul to get his butt back on this show. Okay? Now, in all honesty, one of the reasons he and I do this together is so we can keep the channel rolling while the other one is not available. But let's dig into the content. Big 12 expansion, again, is hot and heavy. It's a huge topic. A couple different articles came out about it. The original article was at themessenger.com, but the one I'm going to share with you is from Brett McMurphy over at the Action Network. I'm sharing that one because it's a little shorter, and I don't want to bore you by reading you a really long article. But what I will do is after I share the Brett article, I'll give you a couple things, a couple bullet points that was in the other article that Brett's article didn't mention. And then I'll give you my thoughts on this whole thing at the end. The Big 12 isn't quite done expanding yet. The Big 12 is seriously considering adding Gonzaga as a men's basketball member for either the 2024 or 2025 school year, sources told Action Network. This would be a major coup for the Big 12, a source said. A decision on Gonzaga could come quickly within the next 2 weeks, a source said. A key component is that Gonzaga could be willing to accept less revenue at the outset of joining the Big 12. Similar to SMU joining the ACC, before the Bulldogs would eventually receive full basketball revenue shares, a source said. The Big 12's decision comes just 2 months after the league announced it would add Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah in 2024. The Big 12 is not considering adding Oregon State or Washington State, sources said. Brett saw the need to throw that in there because there's been a lot of chatter about that going on as of late. Besides men's basketball, Gonzaga also would join the Big 12 in baseball, women's soccer, volleyball, and men's and women's tennis, a source said. The Messenger first reported the Big 12 had resumed talks with Gonzaga. After the Big 12 announced in August that it would add Colorado, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark said the league was done expanding. Right now, we're done, Yormark said in mid-August. We had a strategy, and effectively we've been able to execute it. Initially, I wasn't sure if we'd grow to 14 or 16. I think 16 was kind of a dream scenario, end quote. Yormark also said in August, conversations with Gonzaga and UConn were done. Unfortunately, things didn't work out because the dream scenario of getting to 16 schools unfolded for us, Yormark told the Marchand and Alran Sports Media podcast. However, because of the changing economics of future alignment, such as Cal, Stanford, and SMU going to the ACC, where incoming schools would initially accept smaller revenue shares, the Big 12 decided it would revisit adding Gonzaga if the school was receptive, a source said. Yormark has stated publicly multiple times he believes men's basketball media revenue is undervalued, and once the Big 12's media rights deal expires in 2031, he envisions negotiating separate deals for football and men's basketball. The addition of Gonzaga in men's basketball would give the Big 12 17 basketball members and strengthen what already is considered the nation's top basketball conference. Kansas, Baylor, Houston, and future member Arizona all ranked in the top 11 of last year's final AP Top 25 rankings. All 5 schools, including Gonzaga, are listed in the Almanac's preseason Top 25 rankings. So a very interesting article there by Brett McMurphy over at the Action Network. Now, a couple things that the Messenger article talked about that Brett didn't mention in his article mainly touches on the financial piece of this thing. When you look at Gonzaga bringing them in, one of the things that the Messenger talked about was Gonzaga will not generate revenue because they are not a P5 school and they don't have a football program. So what that means is basically the networks, Fox and ESPN, are likely not going to pay pro rata for these schools to enter the conference. For example, we know when the Big 12 added the Four Corner schools, ESPN was contractually obligated to pay them their share of the media revenue, which would be about $20 million a year. It was in the contract. They had to do that. Now, I don't know if there was a max number of schools they could add, but either way, they all had to be Power 5. Now, Fox was not contractually obligated to do that, but according to reports in the media, they verbally agreed to add money to the pot for adding those Four Corner schools because they were Power 5s and because they felt like they would bring value. Now, when you look at Gonzaga, they would be getting a full share of the basketball revenue in the future. Now, based on the current TV deal the Big 12 has, that would be what? Gosh, 15%. What you'd be looking at what? $8 to $10 million a year, maybe they'd get on the deal, potentially out of the $32 million. That's still more than they're making in the West Coast Conference. And if Brett Yormark is able to achieve his goal and decouple basketball and football and get two separate media deals done in 2031, they can make even more than that $8 to $10 million. And that $8 to $10 million is a just straight up estimate off the top of my head. I don't have that number. I don't have proof of that number. That's just an estimate I'm throwing out there based on really quick, dumb math, because I am not good at doing math in my head. So let's just say $8 million for the sake of sanity. That's still more than what they're making in the West Coast Conference. And it also talked about Gonzaga. What would make it worthwhile for them is potentially, if it's worthwhile for them financially, is they would have to bring in more. They would have to bank on getting more revenue from the Big 12 in other revenue streams. Like if the Big 12 is able to go out like the tournaments they're playing in Mexico or the games they're playing in Mexico, if they're able to get like a preseason Big 12 tournament somewhere that would add more revenue to the league, things like that might come in the future. If they can get more revenue from that, and it will increase their players' opportunity to get NIL money, which could in return help recruiting, that might offset money they would lose from leaving the West Coast Conference. Now, money they would lose from the West Coast Conference would be their future NCAA tournament money. The Messenger talked about this. The way NCAA tournament money is distributed, it's over a 6-year period. For every team a conference gets into the NCAA tournament, every game that team plays, the conference gets about $2 million. So Gonzaga is still getting, the conference is still getting about $2 million for every NCAA tournament game Gonzaga played in, dating all the way back to what, 2018 at this point? Or 2017, I guess now. So if they leave the league and go to the Big 12, any future money that they would have gotten would stay with the West Coast Conference. They would not get their share of it, right? So they would lose that money. So they would have to bank, and since they're not getting any money from the current TV deal from the Big 12, where would the money come from? That's a question I have. I hope somebody can answer that for me. Would it come from other revenue streams like I mentioned? Would it have to come out of the pockets of the existing 16 members? If that's the case, I am not for this move whatsoever. I do not think it's worth bringing in Gonzaga if you have to pay them out of the coffers that are already going to the other teams. I just don't think I don't think they bring enough value to make that worthwhile. Now, that's without me looking at the numbers, okay? And that's just based off the top of my head. Now here's my opinion on this. I kind of look at this from two different lenses. The first lens I'm looking at this through is strictly as a fan of the West Virginia Mountaineers. We're over here on the East Coast. We also have UCF down in the Southeast on the East Coast, and we have Cincinnati close to us. You add a team from the Pacific Northwest that's not even a football school. So all the travel is from the non-revenue sports and then basketball, which plays multiple games a week, sometimes in the middle of the week. So that makes your travel even harder. The travel would be even more brutal than it already is. And even when you look at the Texas schools, it would make travel brutal for the Texas schools even. Really any school in the conference with the exception of maybe BYU, maybe Utah. I don't know. I don't know how far Utah is without looking at a map. A BYU fan, a Utah fan, are you guys close enough to Spokane, Washington for your teams to be travel partners with Gonzaga? Let me know in the comment section because I have no idea. I'd be interested in knowing that. But I just think geographically it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to come alone. Now, a lot of people are going to throw out there, well, that's why they're going to eventually bring in Washington State and Oregon State. Not so fast, my friend. I don't know that that's going to happen. It might, but as of right now, there's been no interest, according to Brett McMurphy. Now, if you look at this strictly from a conference standpoint, I can kind of understand why Brett Yormark would want to do this. He's looking at this, in my opinion, not only as a financial play, but he's looking at it from a stability play. Think about this. Go back to when Brett Yormark was able to extend the Big 12's media deal with ESPN and Fox and get that $31.7 million. He knew that the Big 10 and the SEC were going to make a lot more money than the Big 12. He knew the Big 12 was not worth that much money. He's smart enough to know that. Okay. And of course, he was working with Endeavor, who was probably also smart enough to realize that. And the Big 12 presidents were smart enough to realize that, unlike the presidents in the Pac-12, who thought they were worth $50 million. Brett Yormark knew the Big 12 wasn't worth $50 million, so he didn't ask for $50 million. At least I don't think he did. If he did, it didn't come out in the media. So that being said, he knows the value of the league from a football perspective, but he also knows the value of the league from a basketball perspective, and he thinks that basketball is undervalued, like McMurphy's article mentioned. If he's able to decouple basketball from football, okay, and get the basketball revenue up even higher than it already is, he can at least get that gap between the Big Ten and SEC a little bit more narrow. He's never going to catch them, and he knows that, but he can get a little bit more narrow. But here's what's the most important piece of this, in my opinion. If you look at this from a wider scale, from a 30,000-foot view, here's what you got to look at. It's a stability play. If you've got Arizona, Kansas, Gonzaga, Baylor, Houston, Cincinnati, West Virginia, Kansas State, Texas Tech, all these really good basketball schools in one conference, okay? Some of the top brands in the country, all in one conference. When they start negotiating about the NCAA tournament, when they start having talks about potentially, the Big Ten and SEC maybe moving away from the NCAA and doing their own thing, you don't think the kind of money the NCAA tournament generates is going to be part of that conversation? And as long as that's part of the conversation, and the Big 12 has all these top basketball brands in their conference, they got to be included in the conversation. They can't leave them out, folks. It wouldn't make any sense. You don't want to have a postseason basketball tournament that doesn't include Kansas or Arizona or Houston or Cincinnati or Baylor, do you? Or Gonzaga? Do you want to have that conversation? Or do you want to have that tournament? No, you don't. So I think Brett Yormark is not only looking at this from a financial perspective, but stability. As long as those types of schools are in this league and they keep succeeding on the basketball court, like he's betting on them doing, the Big 12 will always be in any conversation about the format, the nature, the stability, whatever, of NCAA athletics. And he can always have a seat at the quote-unquote big boy table strictly because of their basketball and the value that brings in March. That March that brings a crap load of money. There have been talks that the power leagues may separate from the NCAA and have their own postseason tournament. Well, guess what? If they do that, they can't leave the Big 12 out, folks. And if you bring the Big 12 to the table for a basketball discussion, guess what Brett Yormark's going to say? We want to be included in football too. So there you have it, folks. That's my take. As a West Virginia fan, I don't particularly like it, but I understand for the betterment of the conference how it could benefit the league. But it has to make sense financially for this to make sense. I'll be anxious to see what further reports may come out in the future regarding how Gonzaga gets paid for their first 4 to 5 years in the conference. I'll be interested to hear that because they could be betting on the future here by making this move. And I'll be anxious to hear more details on it. I want to hear in the comment section, guys, what do you think about this move? If you're a Gonzaga fan, do you want to go to the Big 12, Or are you perfectly fine in the West Coast Conference where you're at? And Big 12 fans, let me know. Would you like to have Gonzaga in this conference as a basketball member, and also, by the way, a member in those other sports as well, which could help us in some other areas, in baseball and other things? Let me know your thoughts. Guys, please like this video. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Mountaineer Paul and I are trying to get this channel to continue to grow. It's been the off season. We haven't had a whole lot of content to put out, but this was an important topic I felt like I needed to address, even though he was unable to join me. But like I said, give him a hard time in the comment section. Tell him you can't wait to get him back on here, or go congratulate him on getting back in his home. And also, I don't want to forget, I've done a couple of videos over on my football channel, Kuz's Corner. By the way, subscribe to that if you haven't yet, and Mountaineer Paul's channel, Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. Hearts and prayers go out to the family of Dale Wolfley, guys. Gone way too soon at a young age of 56. He's leaving behind three kids that I know of. Plus, a lot of people that care about him. I don't know if Dale was married or not. I assume he was. But nonetheless, he's leaving behind a lot of loved ones, a lot of former teammates, a lot of coaches, a lot of people he worked with on a daily basis in and around the West Virginia program. Just a sad day for Mountaineer Athletics today. So hearts and prayers to Dale Wolfley's family, friends, and loved ones today. With that being said, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in to this video. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button on your way out. Thanks again. This video is over. I'm out.